My name is Clara. I'm 34 years old, and if you walked into my studio right now, you'd find a room that smells gently of old paper, India ink, and lavender tea. I work as a historical preservation draftsman, which is just a formal way of saying I spend my days studying the blueprints of buildings that have survived the test of time, drawing out the lines of structures built to withstand heavy weather. I like things that are steady. I like foundations that don't shift when the wind changes. But on a humid, heavy Thursday afternoon late in June, the only thing shifting was the air on a quiet porch in North Georgia and the relentless, aggressive vibration of my cell phone against the cedar table. It rang 31 times in a single afternoon. I know the exact number because my 8-year-old daughter, Chloe, was sitting on the porch steps, keeping track with a piece of blue sidewalk chalk. Every time the screen lit up, every time that low buzzing hum rattled the wooden table, she would draw another straight, neat line on the concrete. To her, it was a game. A little puzzle to pass the time while the afternoon heat settled over the valley. She thought someone was just desperate to play with us. But I knew better. I sat there in a wicker chair, a warm cup of coffee resting between my palms, watching the mist rise off the surface of a hidden glassy lake just 100 yards from our cabin. My 5-year-old son, Leo, was down by the water's edge, completely absorbed in the magnificent task of skimming flat river stones across the calm surface. He didn't care about the phone. He didn't care about the noise. He only cared about the ripples stretching out toward the tree line. 200 miles away, across 2 state lines, my sister Beatrice and my mother Evelyn were standing in the hyper-polished, air-conditioned lobby of an exclusive luxury wellness chalet in Aspen. I didn't need to be there to see it. I could picture the scene with absolute architectural clarity. Beatrice, with her designer sunglasses pushed up into her highlighted hair, her face turning a dangerous shade of crimson as she leaned over a marble counter, practically spitting words at a 20-something resort clerk who was calmly refusing to hand over a room key. And my mother, standing a few paces behind her, clutching her vintage leather handbag like a shield, looking entirely bewildered by a reality she hadn't anticipated. They were trapped in a public financial reckoning of their own making. But on that porch, under the shade of the Georgia pines, I didn't look at the screen. I didn't slide my thumb across the glass to answer. For the first time in my entire adult life, I chose the quiet rhythm of my children's laughter over the loud, suffocating demands of my family's expectations. Take a breath with me for a second. Pull up a chair, take a sip of whatever you're drinking, and let's talk. Because if you've ever been the person who quietly holds the family structure together, the one who builds the safety net, but is never actually invited to sit in the swing, then you know that a moment of defiance like this doesn't happen overnight. It is built brick by brick. Type the word boundaries in the comments right now if you already know exactly what kind of storm I'm talking about. Let me tell you the blueprint of how we got here. To truly understand why those 31 phone calls went unanswered, you have to understand the kind of life I lived before that afternoon. For the past 7 years, my life had been governed by a very specific, almost mathematical structure. Every morning, my alarm went off at exactly 5:15 a.m. By 6 a.m., I would be packing 2 school lunches, cutting the crusts off Leo's sandwiches because textures make him anxious, and organizing Chloe's binder so she wouldn't lose her reading logs. By 7:30 a.m., I was at my drafting table at the historical preservation firm on Peachtree Street, surrounded by calipers, heavy linen paper, and archival inks. My job requires a massive amount of patience and an obsession with detail. When a historical building is decaying, you can't just slap a fresh coat of plaster over the rot and call it a day. You have to study the original structural integrity. You have to find where the moisture is leaking through the foundation, where the joists are bowing under weight they weren't designed to carry. And you have to meticulously draw a plan to reinforce it without altering its character. I loved my work because numbers and architectural lines don't emotionalize. A right angle is always 90 degrees. A load-bearing wall doesn't guilt you into carrying more than its structural maximum. Outside of the office, I applied that exact same structural precision to my personal life. Being a single mother to 2 young children on a preservationist's salary meant that my budget spreadsheet had 14 distinct, color-coded columns. I knew exactly down to the penny how much we spent on generic groceries, municipal water, and dental copays. I bought our gasoline exclusively on Tuesday mornings because the station near the interstate ran a hidden 6-cent volume discount. And every single month, without fail, I took a small, hard-earned portion of my freelance consulting income and put it into a separate, hidden savings account. I labeled it Restoration. In my mind, it was an emergency fund, an untouchable baseline designed to keep my children safe if our own roof ever started to leak. But see, here is the psychological trap of being the organized one in a chaotic family system. Being good with structure and careful with resources is rarely viewed as a hard-earned skill. Instead, it's treated as an available target. People don't necessarily resent you for being broke, but they will deeply resent you for being deliberate. They will look at your savings account, your strict boundaries, and your ability to say a calm, firm no, and they will interpret it as a personal insult. They view your financial and emotional stability as an unpaid line of credit, as then a natural right of credit that they have a natural right to draw from whenever their own poorly constructed walls start to cave in. And that brings me to my older sister, Beatrice. Beatrice is 37, an interior design consultant who specializes in what she calls high vibrational, luxury minimalism. If you met her, you'd probably find her incredibly captivating. She speaks in a soft, melodic voice about feng shui, curated aesthetics, and protecting her personal energy vortex. But if you look closely at her actual lifestyle, the math doesn't add up. She drives a leased European SUV with a custom leather interior, wears designer linen wraps that cost more than my monthly utility bill, and regularly posts photos of herself sipping artisanal cocktails at boutique hotels. For years, I watched Beatrice navigate the world like an elegant ghost, floating over the harsh realities of bills, interest rates, and debt. She didn't believe in spreadsheets or budgets. She believed in manifestation and abundance mindsets. But the dirty little secret behind her beautiful, highly aesthetic universe was that it was built entirely on a foundation of shifting sand and psychological leverage. Beatrice was dangerously, heavily over-leveraged on 4 different high-interest credit cards, and her primary strategy for balancing her personal ledger was utilizing our mother's emotional guilt as an open wallet. While I was spending my weekends climbing into damp basements to inspect historical timber framing for extra consulting fees, Beatrice was spending her weekends convincing our mother, Evelyn, that her social standing in the community depended entirely on the appearance of luxury. And because I was the reliable daughter, the one who never made a scene, the one who always paid her bills on time, and the one who quietly fixed the plumbing leaks at our mother's house, I became the invisible pillar. I was the structural beam expected to carry the weight of Beatrice's aesthetic choices without ever asking for a seat at the table. Have you ever been the sibling who handles the actual crises while the other sibling handles the appearances? Take a sip of your coffee and think about that, because we are about to look at the ledger that broke the system. The true architect of my patience was my father, Arthur Young. He was a master carpenter who spent 45 years building the custom timber homes that dot the mountain ridges of North Georgia. He was a man with rough, calloused hands that smelled permanently of cedar shavings, beeswax, and mineral spirits. He didn't speak much, but when he did, he used architectural terms to describe human behavior. He used to tell me that you could always spot a dishonest craftsman by looking at how they treated the joints of a house, the hidden places where the wood meets beneath the drywall. Anyone can make a facade look beautiful, Clara, he'd say, tapping his pencil against his worn leather ledger. But it's the structural joinery that holds the roof up when the ice storm hits. 4 years ago, I sat beside his narrow hospital bed at the Emory University Clinic. His lungs were failing him, and his once massive frame looked heartbreakingly fragile beneath the white cotton sheets. Beatrice was there too, but she spent most of her time out in the hallway on her phone, managing a scheduling emergency with a textile vendor for one of her luxury clients. She couldn't handle the heavy, unadorned reality of a dying man's room. It lacked the aesthetic curation she required to feel comfortable. When Beatrice stepped out to take yet another call, my father turned his head toward me. His eyes, though tired, were incredibly sharp. He reached beneath his thin pillow and pulled out a worn, heavy manila envelope. Inside was a tarnished brass key and a hand-bound leather ledger containing his final accounts. 4 years ago, in the woodshop smelling of cedar shavings, her father handed her a brass key and a ledger. Clara, you see the grain of the wood, not just the polish. Look after your mother's roof. Don't let Beatrice strip the foundation. He didn't leave the ledger to Beatrice, and we both knew why. 2 years prior, my father had discovered that Beatrice had quietly convinced our mother to co-sign on a $15,000 signature loan to finance her interior design showroom launch, a loan that Beatrice promptly defaulted on, leaving my parents to quietly drain their emergency funds to protect their credit score. He loved Beatrice, but he did not trust her with a structural load. After he passed away on a crisp Tuesday morning in October, I opened that manila envelope at my kitchen table and did exactly what he asked. The small life insurance policy paid out exactly $45,000. I used $30,000 of it to clear the remaining medical debts from his treatment and perform a massive, necessary structural reinforcement on my mother's historic Victorian cottage, repairing a hidden leak in the crawl space that had rotted the master bathroom floor joists. The remaining $15,000 I placed into a dedicated, high-yield savings account at a local credit union. I registered the account under a dual-tier compliance framework. My mother, Evelyn, was listed as a primary authorized user so she could access emergency cash if her water heater burst or her prescriptions exceeded her Social Security stipend. But because I was the fiduciary custodian, my name was tied to the digital ledger and the automated notification system. To assist my mother with her day-to-day expenses, I also established a recurring, automated $300 monthly transfer from my own personal checking account directly into her checking account. It was a quiet arrangement. I didn't boast about it, and I didn't list it as a talking point at family holidays. I simply treated it as a necessary structural column to ensure my mother's comfort. Beatrice, whose design business fluctuated wildly based on her personal spending habits, contributed absolutely nothing to our mother's daily upkeep. Whenever the topic of shared family expenses arose, Beatrice would smooth down her designer linen wraps, sigh melodically, and say, "I am currently reinvesting all my liquid capital into expanding my brand's digital footprint. We all have to contribute in our own unique ways." But Beatrice's unique contribution wasn't financial. It was psychological. She quickly realized that while I held the financial ledger, she held the emotional currency. Beatrice had two beautifully dressed, highly photogenic children who were the absolute center of our mother's universe. And Beatrice learned very early how to spend that currency to buy exactly what she wanted. The real fractures in our family foundation didn't appear in a dramatic shouting match across a crowded room. They appeared during an exquisitely curated dinner party at Beatrice's newly remodeled mid-century modern home. It was early April, the time of year when the dogwoods in North Georgia are just beginning to split their buds, casting a soft white haze across the valleys. Beatrice had invited our mother and me over under the guise of an intimate family alignment evening. When I arrived with Chloe and Leo, the house looked like a page ripped straight from an architectural design catalog. The lighting was dimmed to a warm, theatrical amber. A high-end aromatherapy diffuser was pumping a delicate mist of white, sage and cedarwood into the air, and a vintage vinyl record was spinning some obscure, slow-tempo jazz in the background. Beatrice was standing by her concrete kitchen island, wearing an ivory silk jumpsuit that looked completely incompatible with the reality of cooking dinner. She was pouring organic white wine into hand-blown crystal stemware. My mother, Evelyn, was already perched on a low-profile buccal sofa, looking completely enchanted by the atmosphere. Beatrice's two children, who were polished and dressed in matching linen sets, were quietly playing with minimalist wooden blocks on a wool rug. The moment my kids walked in, the energetic equilibrium shifted. Leo, who was 5, and full of uncontainable physical energy, immediately ran toward the window to look at a bird, his sneakers squeaking faintly against the polished concrete floor. Chloe dropped her heavy school backpack near the entryway with a dull, echoing thud. I saw Beatrice's left eyelid give a microscopic, involuntary twitch. Dinner was served on asymmetric matte ceramic plates. It was a completely deconstructed, highly aesthetic meal. Locally sourced microgreens, heirloom carrots roasted with lavender-infused honey, and small portions of poached wild salmon. My kids, who had spent the afternoon running around a public playground, looked at the plates like they were being served a science experiment. Leo immediately began dissecting his salmon with a look of profound skepticism, while Chloe quietly whispered to me, asking if there were any rolls. As Beatrice cleared the plates, moving with the practiced grace of a gallery curator, she set down a polished travertine tray holding a ceramic teapot. She poured 3 cups of herbal tea, pulled out her latest model titanium phone, and smoothly slid it across the table toward our mother. "Mom, I want you to look at something truly transformative," Beatrice murmured, her voice dropping into that rhythmic, soothing cadence she uses when she's selling a high-end design concept to a wealthy client. "You know how our annual family lake trips have felt a bit stagnant the last few years? The same old screened porches, the same heavy humidity, the same uninspired environment. I felt our spirits collectively calling for an elevation. So, I took the liberty of scouting a new space for our summer retreat." My mother leaned forward, squinting slightly, as Beatrice scrolled through a series of high-resolution images. The screen displayed a stunning, ultra-luxurious wellness chalet tucked into the dramatic snow-capped ridges of Aspen, Colorado. It featured massive floor-to-ceilings glass walls, a private infinity plunge pool that seemed to float over the mountain canopy, and an outdoor yoga deck constructed from reclaimed Indonesian teak. It was breathtaking, hyper-expensive, and entirely pretentious. 4 nights, standard mountain view, full access to the holistic mindfulness itinerary, the organic juice bar, and the private thermal baths, Beatrice said, her smile perfectly symmetrical. "It's a completely curated space designed to reset our baseline energy. I've already taken care of the initial scheduling details." My mother's face lit up with a look of pure, childlike excitement. "Oh, Beatrice, it looks absolutely heavenly. Like a dream. But honey, isn't a place like that incredibly difficult to get into? And the cost? It's $4,500 for the complete family package." Beatrice replied smoothly, not blinking once. Then, she turned her head slowly, her gaze landing directly on me. The warmth in her eyes vanished, replaced by a cool, analytical distance. "And that brings me to the structural parameters of the trip. Clara, I've been thinking deeply about the emotional alignment of this itinerary. This chalet is a sanctuary of absolute silence and deep mindfulness. The meditation schedules are incredibly rigorous, and the property has a very strict zero-noise policy in the communal spaces." I set my teacup down on the table, the ceramic making a sharp, clean click against the wood. "What exactly are the parameters, Beatrice? Just say it clearly." Beatrice tilted her head, her expression shifting into a mask of pure, synthetic empathy. "I'm saying this with love, Clara, but Chloe and Leo simply wouldn't thrive in an environment like that. Leo's sensory needs and his physical volume would be completely incompatible with the chalet's mindfulness regulations. My children have been practicing quiet containment for months. So, we've decided that this trip will just be for me, Mom, and my kids. Your children are being excluded from the itinerary. They aren't coming." The words hung in the warm, scented air of the kitchen like a thin sheet of glass that had just shattered on the floor. "Your children aren't coming." Beatrice said it with the casual, matter-of-fact tone of a weather reporter announcing a slight dip in the humidity. I didn't let my expression change. When you spend your life drafting historical lines, you learn to keep your hand perfectly steady, even when the ink is heavy. I didn't yell. I didn't throw my napkin onto my plate. Instead, I let my eyes slide past Beatrice's shoulder, tracking the movement in the adjacent living room. My mother, Evelyn, was standing near the low-profile buccal sofa. Her hands were fidgeting with the clasp of her vintage leather handbag. She pulled it open, reached inside, and her fingers emerged holding a familiar piece of plastic. It was a matte blue debit card with a small silver chip. My debit card. The secondary card connected directly to the home upkeep fund I had meticulously maintained ever since my father passed away. I had left that card inside the ceramic bowl on her kitchen counter 2 years ago, specifically instructing her to keep it safe and use it exclusively if an emergency arose, like a burst pipe, a failing water heater, or an unexpected medical copay. "Why do you have my card out, Mom?" I asked, my voice remaining entirely flat, dropping an octave below the ambient jazz music humming from the speakers. My mother looked down at the blue plastic, then up at Beatrice, her eyes darting between us like a bird trapped in a structural cage. "Well," Beatrice said, "we needed to process the remaining chalet balance tonight to lock in the early bird pricing," she said. "She said you wanted to take care of the family's portion since you missed the planning sessions." Beatrice didn't flinch. She simply took a slow, delicate sip of her organic white wine, her jaw tightening just enough to betray the absolute certainty of her position. She had calculated everything perfectly. She truly believed that my silence over the years was a sign of structural weakness rather than deliberate containment. She thought that because I always absorbed the family's emotional overhead, I would absorb the financial overhead of my own children's exclusion. A year prior, Beatrice borrowed their mother's car and returned it with a dented bumper, laughing it off as a spatial miscalculation, while Clara quietly paid the $200 deductible to protect her mother's peace. Sitting at that concrete island, watching my mother clutch that card like a stolen trophy, a sudden wave of absolute clarity washed over me. I realized that my sister didn't just want a luxury vacation. She wanted a luxury vacation financed entirely by the sister she looked down upon. She wanted to stand on an Indonesian teak deck in Aspen, looking out over the mountain peaks, knowing that the quiet, boring preservationist back in Georgia had picked up the check. Let me pause here and ask you a real question, woman to woman, over this cup of coffee. Have you ever sat across a room from someone you love? Someone who shares your biological blueprint? And realize they have been studying your kindness not to replicate it, but to find the exact seams where they can rip your wallet open? Have you ever watched someone plot against you while wearing a beautiful white silk smile that you practically paid for? If you know that exact ache, that specific, quiet anger that hardens into steel inside your chest, type the word boundaries in the comment section right now. Let me see you in the dark. I didn't reach across the table to grab the card. I didn't give Beatrice the dramatic, emotional performance she had undoubtedly rehearsed an argument against. I simply stood up from the counter, walked into the living room, and gathered Chloe and Leo's things. "Keep the card for tonight, Mom," I said softly, looking her directly in the eyes until she looked down at the wool rug. "We're heading home." The drive back to our apartment took exactly 14 minutes, and for the entire duration, the interior of my car was completely silent. Chloe sat in the passenger seat, her head leaned against the glass, watching the streetlights of our small town blur into long streaks of amber gold. Leo was already half asleep in the back, his small hand still loosely clutching a plastic dinosaur. I kept both hands at the 10 and 2 position on the steering wheel, my grip firm, my breathing steady. I wasn't crying. I wasn't shaking. When a structural engineer finds a fracture in a massive fracture in a main supporting beam, they don't sit down and weep over the timber. They go back to the drafting table and look at the legal parameters of the original design. The moment I got the kids into bed, tucked the sheets under their chins, and closed their bedroom door, I didn't pour another cup of tea. I didn't call a friend to vent. I walked straight into my small home office, turned on the desk lamp, and pulled my father's original leather-bound ledger out of the fireproof safe. I sat there until 2:00 a.m. studying the exact legal and financial frameworks my father had laid out when he established the Home Upkeep Fund. My father wasn't an attorney, but he was a man who understood contracts, liabilities, and human nature deeply. When he set up the account framework with the credit union 4 years ago, he had insisted on drafting a custom fiduciary memorandum that we both signed in front of a county notary. As I turned the yellowed pages of his handwritten notes, my eyes locked onto a specific clause we had inserted into the secondary compliance parameters, a mechanism called a restricted trust variance clause. At the time, we had created it to protect my mother from potential financial scams or aggressive door-to-door contractors. The clause explicitly stated that while Evelyn Young was a registered, authorized user on the account, her secondary debit access was structurally limited by an automated compliance trigger. Specifically, any single debit card transaction or point-of-sale withdrawal exceeding the threshold of $200 would automatically be placed into a pending verification status by the credit union's server. To release those funds, the transaction had to be accompanied by a digital upload of a certified line item construction invoice or a verified medical billing code that matched the historical upkeep parameters of her primary residence. If a charge came through that didn't feature an architectural compliance code or a licensed contractor's tax ID number, the server wouldn't just flag it. It would treat the transaction as a non-qualifying luxury variance. The account itself wouldn't be frozen. The money would still be sitting there safely, but the specific merchant attempt would receive a hard, automated system decline. Beatrice, with all her sophisticated interior design knowledge and psychological maneuvering, knew absolutely nothing about this clause. She had never bothered to read the paperwork my father left behind. To her, a bank account wasn't a structural system governed by legal rules. It was just a magical black box that you slid a plastic card into until it stopped giving you what you wanted. She assumed that because the money was physically in the account, her luxury wellness chalet booking would slide right through the processing system without a single hitch. I leaned back in my chair, looking out the dark window at the quiet silhouette of the Georgia pines. I could have called my mother the next morning. I could have texted Beatrice and warned her that the transaction would fail. I could have had the big, loud family argument that they were probably expecting. But when someone views your kindness as a subscription service, you don't owe them a customer support notification before you cancel the account. Some people only learn the value of a boundary when they are handed the actual bill. The next morning, while the sun was just beginning to burn the low fog off the valley, I didn't reach for my phone to check if Beatrice had tried to swipe the card. I didn't need to check. Instead, I drove down to the credit union branch on Peachtree Street, the old brick building across from the tire shop, and walked straight up to the commercial service desk. I sat down with a quiet, efficient clerk named Marcus. I presented my father's original notarized ledger and the formal account paperwork. I need to ensure the automated compliance parameters on the maintenance fund are fully active, I told him, my voice matching the low, steady hum of the bank's air conditioning, specifically the restricted trust variance trigger. I want to confirm that any single transaction over $200 that lacks a verified local contracting invoice code will be immediately deflected by the server. Marcus ran his fingers across his keyboard, his eyes reflecting the blue glow of the monitor, as he accessed the master routing profiles. After a few seconds, he looked up and gave me a small, professional nod. The variance protocol is fully locked in, Ms. Young. It's been active since the account was established. Any uncoded corporate charge or out-of-state luxury merchant attempt will trigger an automatic system decline at point of sale. The funds will remain perfectly safe in the vault, but the merchant will receive a hard code 91. Insufficient authorized baseline. Thank you, Marcus, I said. I stood up, smoothed down my skirt, and walked back out into the bright Georgia sunlight. The trap was set, but it wasn't a trap built out of malice or revenge. It was a trap built out of absolute architectural compliance. I was simply allowing the structural parameters my father designed to do exactly what they were meant to do. Protect the foundation from being stripped. With that system fully secured, I opened my personal banking app on my phone and looked at my private restoration savings account. The money I had earned through my own late-night architectural consulting work. It held exactly $2,600. I didn't spend it on designer linen or high-end aromatherapy. I opened a separate browser tab and typed a very specific search phrase into the bar. Savannah Beach Vacation Family. I spent the next 45 minutes reviewing small, unpretentious properties on Tybee Island, a quiet, sandy stretch of coast just 20 minutes east of Savannah. It was the exact kind of place my father would have chosen. No private infinity plunge pools, no organic juice bars, no pretentious mindfulness itineraries. Just wide open salt air, historic lighthouses, weathered wooden boardwalks, and sand that got into everything. I found a small family-run inn tucked behind a low dune wall, just a short walk from the tide pools. They had a clean, simple room available with a small kitchenette, a screen door that opened toward the sound of the surf, and a view of a narrow sliver of blue ocean between two historic cottages. The cost was exactly $89 a night. I pulled out a clean legal pad and ran the numbers line by line, the exact same way I ran every restoration grant budget at my office. Room, 4 nights at $89 a night came to exactly $356. Gasoline, a round trip of roughly 480 miles in my efficient compact sedan, calculated to exactly $200 flat. Food, $300 for groceries, allowing us to cook our own meals in the kitchenette and buy fresh shrimp straight from the local docks. Activities, $150 for kayak rentals, ice cream cones, and a guided dolphin boat tour if Leo asked nicely. The total for our entire adventure came to exactly $1,006. My private account had more than enough to cover it without putting a single penny on a credit card. I pressed the confirmation button and the booking receipt arrived in my inbox exactly 12 seconds later. I took a green sticky note from my desk, wrote the words "Just Beach" on it in clear block letters, and stuck it directly to the front of our refrigerator. No dates, no location, no luxury price tags. I knew how information traveled through the telephone lines of my family, and I wanted the lines completely clean. When Chloe walked into the kitchen a few minutes later, her eyes immediately caught the bright green square against the white metal. "Beach," she read out loud, her face lighting up with that sudden pure magic that only an 8-year-old can muster. "Are we going, Mommy?" I knelt down, brushed a stray curl of hair out of her eyes, and smiled. The first genuine, unburdened smile to touch my lips in weeks. "It's a complete surprise, sweetie," I whispered. "Just you, me, and Leo, and I promise you, nobody can touch this one." The dramatic events that unfolded 3 days before check-in were pieced together later, mostly from a close family relative who had the unfortunate pleasure of acting as Beatrice's sounding board. It was a crisp Tuesday morning at exactly 10:00 a.m. when the automated accounting system at the luxury wellness chalet in Aspen attempted to process the remaining balance of $4,500. As the digital request traveled down the network lines to our local credit union in Georgia, it knocked directly against the automated parameters of the server. The restricted trust variance clause didn't blink. Because the corporate transaction lacked a verified local contractor invoice code or an approved municipal tax ID, the system instantly blocked the channel. The server issued a hard, automated system deflection back to the resort's merchant terminal. Within 12 seconds, a high-priority notification dropped into Beatrice's inbox with a cold digital chime. The subject line read, "Urgent notification. Payment declined for reservation 8841. The body of the message was brief, stating that the transaction on the primary card ending in 7741 had been turned away due to an uncoded compliance error, and an alternative form of verified payment was required within 48 hours to prevent immediate forfeiture of the non-refundable $800 early bird deposit. Beatrice immediately went into a state of hyper-focused panic. She didn't call the bank. Her first instinct was to call our mother, her voice dropping into a sharp, rapid frequency that completely lacked her usual slow mindfulness cadence. "Mom, there's a glitch with Clara's upkeep account. The resort's billing portal is throwing an insufficient authorization code. I need you to take the physical card down to the automated teller machine on Main Street right now and pull out the cash balance manually." My mother, completely flustered by the sudden elevation in Beatrice's volume, drove her car to the Wells Fargo branch, parked crooked across 2 spaces, and hurried inside the lobby. She slid the blue plastic card into the machine, typed in the historic PIN, and pressed the button for a balance inquiry. The small thermal printer hummed, spitting out a narrow strip of paper. The balance listed on the slip was exactly $12.34. When my mother called Beatrice from the bank lobby, her voice was trembling with a very real, unrehearsed fear. "Beatrice, there is no money here. The ledger says $12. There's nothing to pull out, I think. I think Clara must have moved her personal funds." A long, suffocating pause stretched across the telephone line. Then Beatrice's voice cut through the static like a pair of rusted shears. "She didn't move it. She's hiding it. She's doing this intentionally to sabotage my children's summer alignment. I'm calling her right now." At that exact moment, I was sitting at my drafting desk at the historical preservation firm, calmly adjusting the line weights on a structural drawing for an old brick courthouse on Route 9. My phone began to vibrate aggressively against the wood, the caller ID flashing Beatrice in bright white letters. I didn't lift my hand from the paper. I didn't slide my thumb across the glass. I calmly tapped the side button to decline the call, set the phone face down on the blotter, and went right back to my ink scales. Column B of my structural restoration grant was balancing perfectly on the very first try. Beatrice spent the next 36 hours frantically trying to stitch her crumbling facade back together. She opened her personal credit card application, her fingers tracing the numbers on the screen. A maximum credit threshold of $3,000, with an existing balance of $1,800 already locked in from her luxury linen travel wardrobe purchases. She had exactly $1,200 of available credit remaining. She was short by thousands. She swallowed her immense pride and called her ex-husband, attempting to lease her usual psychological leverage. "I need an emergency wire transfer for $2,400, she demanded, her voice tight. "The kids' summer retreat is hanging in the balance." Her ex-husband let out a short, dry laugh through the speaker. "Beatrice, I don't finance mindfulness chalet trips that I'm not invited to. Call your mother." So she turned her pressure back onto Evelyn. My mother, entirely terrified of Beatrice's threat to restrict her weekend visits with the youngest grandchildren, walked back into the credit union and withdrew $600 from her personal Social Security savings. The money meant for her autumn prescription gap. She placed the bills into a plain paper envelope and handed them over to Beatrice on her front porch. Beatrice scraped the final $600 from her maxed-out credit line, exhausting every single drop of her financial headroom. She managed to wire a partial payment of $1,200 through the resort's portal. But it wasn't enough. The chalet had a strict zero-tolerance policy. Full clearing of the $4,500 balance was mandatory upon arrival, or the reservation would dissolve. We arrived at our small cabin on Tybee Island exactly at noon on Friday, just as the coastal sun was reaching its highest point in the sky. The air smelled thick and heavy, with salt, old cedar boardwalks, and the comforting low-tide scent of the Atlantic marshlands. Leo had his shoes kicked off before the screen door had even finished. Swinging shut against the frame, running directly onto the hot sand with a plastic shovel gripped tightly in his fist. Chloe was right behind him, her face split by a massive, unburdened grin, her bright pink starfish swimsuit already tracking the first grains of sand into our clean kitchen floor. By 2:00 p.m., I was sitting on a wide canvas beach blanket, the warm coastal breeze sweeping across my face, watching my children completely reclaim their space in the world. Chloe was waist-deep in the gentle foam, jumping over the low waves with a rhythmic, joyful laugh that seemed to echo across the entire shoreline. Leo was dropped onto his knees a few yards away, entirely absorbed in the magnificent task of digging a hole that he claimed was designed to catch a dolphin. It was a perfect structure, unpretentious, uncurated, and entirely ours. And then, deep down inside the mesh beach bag resting near my feet, my phone began to vibrate again. I reached inside, my fingers sliding past the sunscreen and the extra snacks, and pulled the screen into the sunlight. The caller ID read Mom. I looked at the number, then looked back up at the ocean. I watched Chloe dive through a cresting wave, her head popping back up, gasping for air, and laughing through the sea spray. I looked at Leo, his forehead covered in sand, completely determined to finish his dolphin trap. I pressed the button to decline. It rang again at 2:16 p.m. I declined it again. At 2:17 p.m., the buzzing hum rattled against the frame of my canvas bag. I didn't slide the bar. I simply flipped the device face down, sliding it completely to the absolute bottom of the dark bag, letting the rhythmic, heavy crash of the Atlantic surf drown out the noise entirely. The phone logged 31 missed calls over the course of that single hour, accompanied by 3 frantic, cracked voicemails from my mother, detailing how the entire Aspen trip had dissolved into an absolute public nightmare in the resort lobby because the final payment was short. They were stuck in a hot parking lot 2 states away, maxed out, broke, and demanding that I fix the structural collapse of a plan that had been engineered to exclude my own children. I didn't answer a single one. I wasn't acting out of anger, and I wasn't trying to prove a petty point across a long distance. I was standing in the warm ocean water holding my 5-year-old son's damp hand while he pointed at a dark gray fin breaking the surface of the water. Just 50 yards out, and that small, real ripple was infinitely more important than any emergency happening in a luxury lobby 200 miles north. As the sun began to drop below the horizon, casting a deep peach and copper glow across the glassy water, Leo came running back up the beach toward the blanket. His hands closed like a small cup. "Mommy, look what the water brought me," he whispered, opening his fingers to reveal a small, bleached sand dollar. It was split entirely down the middle, one half slightly larger than the other, its rough edges worn smooth by the constant tumbling of the tide. "Is it still good if it's broken, Mommy?" he asked, his brow furrowing with a quiet concern. I took the small piece of calcium from his palm, running my thumb over the rough, split edge where the line had fractured, and smiled softly. "The best ones always are, buddy," I whispered, sliding it into my pocket right next to the worn notebook paper my father had written his last words on. "It doesn't need to be perfect to hold its worth. Let's finish our coffee together, sister to sister. Because if there is one thing I want you to carry away from this story, it is this. If someone requires your bank card, your silence, or your emotional compliance to keep a seat open for you at the family table, you were never actually a member of that family. You were just the person funding the venue. And the moment you choose to close the wallet and protect your children, you aren't ruining the trip. You're finally building a foundation that nobody else can touch." Share this with a woman who is still carrying a load she wasn't designed to hold. Drop your own story in the comments below, hit that subscribe button, and I will see you right here for our next quiet conversation.